Welcome, Temple. Welcome to Rocket Pod.
Hello.
How are you today?
Well, I'm fine. I'm sitting in rain, unfortunately, in the middle of Exmoor, which is, I've had a lovely few days, beautiful weather. I'd never realized that, in fact, Exmoor was on a different planet and, in fact, doesn't have things like, phones that work and so on. But apart from that, it's been fine. We had a very nice time.
Fantastic. So just for the audience, so Temple is director of Scotcoin, and very interested to learn really about how you transitioned into the cryptocurrency world. But before we kind of dig into that, if we go back to maybe your childhood and kind of, can you describe what kind of upbringing you had and what led you to where you are today?
Absolutely. Well, for a start, I'm an only child. So as everyone always says, the only child has every advantage you can possibly have. My father was the European manager, sales manager for a company that sold specialist screws. So I spent a lot of my youth overseas. And in fact, I spent 2 years at school in Switzerland, which was very nice, on the Lake of Geneva. In fact, I think I'm right in saying I'm still the only person that's ever passed into a British public school from Switzerland with what used to be called common entrance. I don't even know if it exists anymore. It's so long ago. But I had a very nice time, and I ended up going to the London School of Economics. Now, the London School of Economics, as you probably know, is fairly militant and always has been. And I went there just at the point where they shut the place for virtually 3 years. And it was at the time of Danny Cohn-Bendit, in fact, of Tariq Ali and of Mick Jagger. He was there marginally before me. But it was, in fact, I worked out some time ago that there was a potential of 90 weeks education I could have had, and I had less than 9. And I got a degree in economics, which was very nice. And I'm convinced to this day that because they hadn't seen a picture of me anywhere in the riots and all the rest of it, they said, "Oh, he's all right, give him a degree." So that's probably what happened. But that has another little side effect, because about 20 years ago, I decided to do an MCIM with the CIM, Chartered Institute of Marketing. And if you had a previous degree, you could do it in a very short period of time. And that, suited me very well. So I thought, oh, that's all right. And I thought to myself, oh, I'll need to, because I never collected my certificate, because I don't think they handed them out at that time. And I got in touch with the admissions people, and I said to them, oh, Temple, Melville, blah, blah, here, there, everywhere. And they said, oh, yes, when were you here? And I said, it was from 1966 to 1969. And they said, bit of a problem. We had a flood in 1972 and we lost everything for the 60s. So we've no idea whether you were here or not.
Okay.
And I said, oh, right. And then they said, can you remember the names of any of the people? And of course, I couldn't really remember any of them all those years later. And eventually we sort of cobbled together, and they said, well, the lady said to me very nice, she said, I tell you what, as it is you're going on to do something else, why don't I just write a letter saying you were here, and that'll do. So I said, fine. So that all worked. So that was quite nice. But I just, I feel bereft at not having got a degree. I do still have the letter saying I was there, so I suppose that's something. Anyway, what happened next was quite interesting, because in fact, having been at the LSE, I can't even think how it happened now, but somehow or other I managed to get a job with the forerunner of the EU. And they had a very strange, maybe they still have, they had a very strange system whereby you didn't start work until either the 1st of January or the 1st of July. And of course, I'd taken my degree in inverted commas in the sort of May time. So I had all this period between then and January the 1st. And my mother said to me, she said, oh, my brother's not very well up in Glasgow. It would be really nice if you could, because she was living abroad, It'd be really nice if you could go over up there and look after him or be with him for, you know, a couple of months. I said, oh, fine. And the exciting thing was that when we got there, or when I got there, I discovered that he was an absolute raging alcoholic. And he owned a business in the wholesale fruit market in Glasgow. And I mean, what was going on, as you can imagine, the person running it was an alcoholic, was unbelievable. Anyway, he then collapsed and had to be carted off to hospital. And I thought, well, I better go and see what's happening in the fruit market. And it turned out the guy who was the manager was also an alcoholic. So the whole thing was a complete disaster. And it was a sort of an old family connection and one thing or another. Anyway, so I said, I got in touch with the people, including my mother, and I said, you know, this is a disaster. We should just shut it down. So, and she said, no, just you sort it out. You sort it out. Oh, God, right, okay. So there I was at the age of 20, thrown into being managing director of a wholesale fruit firm in Glasgow, about which I knew absolutely nothing. And anyway, so we got to the 1st of, or up towards the 1st of January, and I said, well, I've got to leave. And my mother said, well, just tell them you know, whatever, that you're going to leave. And so anyway, so I got in touch with the EU, or whatever they were called then. I think it was the EEC. And they said, oh, well, no, it's fine. You can come in July because we haven't got anything for you to do at the moment. So that's what I did. And of course, by the time I got to July, I was fascinated by it, and things were going well, and all that sort of thing. So it was me stuck in Glasgow, which I've basically been ever since, and then thoroughly enjoyed being in Glasgow. I am a Scot. My parents are Scottish, and what have you, the family Scottish. So that was sort of the early part of my career. And while I was in the fruit business, I started buying properties, as people do or did, and it was flats originally. I moved on from flats to shops, commercial buildings, you know, what I would describe as business centres and so on. And in fact, I just literally last year I sold the last one. And that was the bulk of my business life at that time. And I have to say I enjoyed every minute of it. I really did. I mean, I loved being in the fruit business. It was a wonderful experience. I loved being in the property business. That was a wonderful experience. And that was great. But in the meantime, in the middle of the sort of experience of being in the fruit business and the property business, I always had this idea I wanted to be the managing director of a publicly quoted company. And again, cutting a long story short, I became such. Now, the only problem was they didn't have it, the company was going down the drain. So I sort of put some of my properties in it and one thing and another. But the interesting thing about it was that its largest shareholder was, in fact, an investment fund, or an investment trust at that time. And they were very keen because they had a stake in another company called Oric. Now, Oric was a mini computer company. Now, we're talking 1981-ish. And Oric was a sort of competitor to Sinclair's early computers. And it was a bit further advanced. It worked better, and one thing or another. It had a few more programs, and I became fascinated with it. And you know, it was a very interesting experience, and it was a very interesting experience being involved with the City of London and how they work, and one thing or another. And I came out of that in about 1986, and just concentrated on property thereafter. But when Bitcoin appeared on the scene, I was very lucky because somebody in America got in touch with me and said, "Hey, have you read this paper which Satoshi Nakamoto had produced?" And I said, "No," and he sent it to me, and it was like a light bulb went off. And I thought to myself, well, you know, this is the answer. This is all we need. And so I got very interested in it, and of course I bought I mean, I think the first Bitcoin I bought, I paid around $50, I think. And you guess the rest. I've never kept it, so there it goes. But what did occur to me was that there was a very good opportunity for various countries to have their own cryptocurrencies for their own internal purposes. And there is a very famous long-standing cryptocurrency called WIR, W-I-R, in Switzerland, which started in the 1930s. And in essence, it was set up because nobody had any money in the 1930s, and they needed some method of exchange. And the good burghers of Zurich did it, and it exists to this day. And I think they've got about 70,000 businesses that accept WIR. They have 600,000 or 700,000 people that use it, and they have an annual turnover of between 4 and 6 billion euros a year. So, it's a significant part of the Swiss economy. And the great thing is it's not exclusive. So you don't have to, you can go into a shop and say, I want to buy a sofa, and it's 1,000 Swiss francs. And you say, well, I'm sorry, I've only got 700 Swiss francs, but I've got 300 WIR. And everybody goes, yeah, that's fine, no problem. And that's the way it works. So I immediately thought that this would be a very good idea for Scotland. And as frequently happens when I have a good idea, I discover somebody else has had it first. And it was a chap called Derek Nisbet. Now, Derek Nisbet was or is still an IT expert. He's a Scottish IT man, but he lives in Malaga, which is perhaps what Scottish IT people ought to do. And he decided that as the referendum was coming up in 2014, he thought it would be a good idea to have some form of exchange that would work if the pound all fell apart and so on, as far as the Scottish economy was concerned. And he created Scotcoin. And being a one-man band and being an IT man rather than a businessman, he slightly made a cock of it. And I mean, I won't go into all the ins and outs, but basically speaking, when the referendum was lost, he lost interest. And myself and my partner, David Lowe, got involved in sort of late 2015, early 2016, and bought out the IP and bought out the coin and so on. So that's how I came to be involved with crypto.
Okay. So the spark was the white paper that got you in touch with Bitcoin.
Yes.
And okay, so just stopping right here. So as far as for those listeners that the whole cryptocurrency is very new to them, how would you describe, how does it fit in to, I guess, the traditional currencies and commerce that we currently, that have been going for centuries? Could you kind of distill it down so that our listeners can understand why it's relevant in the modern world?
Yeah, really sure. The point is, if you use a credit card or you use a debit card, anything like that, you give it to the shop or wherever it might be, and they take it and they end up with money in their bank account. Now, the reason they end up with money in their bank account is because there is a third party, usually a bank or a system, which says, okay, Mr. X has £100 in his bank account. He's paying £1 to Mr. Y. They take the pound through their system. There's everyone along the line takes a little bit of something out of it. And the poor guy who's accepting the pound, although he gets a pound, will then get a bill for clearing that money. And he's confident that the third party will pay him. That doesn't always happen because there's sometimes issues, but I mean, basically speaking, that he's confident that third party is going to cover his sale. Now, the great thing about blockchains and Bitcoin is that you don't require a third party. I can sell to you or to anyone direct with no intermediary. I can simply say, I'm sending you £1 and the pound will appear in your wallet. And one of the things I always say at this sort of point in a discussion about Bitcoin and blockchain is the very important thing, the most important concept to grasp is that Bitcoin and the blockchain are two entirely different things. The blockchain is an enabling technology. Blockchain makes possible Bitcoin. Bitcoin could not exist without the blockchain, but in fact, the blockchain can do lots and lots and lots of other things that nothing to do with Bitcoin. So it's the blockchain is the important bit. And again, I always liken this to like a railway track. I mean, you've got the railway track, that's your blockchain. You can then put any kind of train or engine or, whatever you want on the rails. And that is, it could be Bitcoin, it could be, a system for tracking stuff, it could be anything. But the point is that the blockchain is quite separate from, the cryptocurrencies and so on. The beauty about what Nakamoto came up with was that he created a system which got around what's called the double spend problem. Now, the double spend problem is that if you are, you can replicate anything digitally, a book or a record or a song or whatever. And the reason that works is because you want it to be identical every time. You don't want to read the book and discover it's got a different ending. You don't want to listen to the music and find that it's got a different ending the next time you listen to it. So that's great. But the problem is with money, it's not the same. You don't want to be able to create endlessly the same pound or whatever. It's got to be different. And the way it's different is because the code which is used to create it is slightly different. It might have one digit different, or there's all sorts of things. But the point is that each one is unique, and the system that he set up made that possible. I always tell the story about Tony Hancock. He had a wonderful skit that he did whereby he had a £5 note, one of the old white £5 notes, and he'd signed his name on it. And he gave it into the bank, and for one reason or other decided he didn't really want to leave it there. So he goes back in and said, "I'll have my £5 back, please." And they gave him £5, no problem. But of course, it wasn't the one that had his signature on it. And he said, "But I want my one. I don't want this other one." And although everybody said, "But it's the same," of course, it's not the same, because he'd signed the one that was his. And that's the same. That's true to this day. I mean, the pound in my pocket is inherently different from the pound in your pocket because you own it or I own it. And that's what the blockchain achieves. It makes it possible to differentiate between the different sums of money and so on that people hold.
No, okay. So I was just thinking. So back when you were doing the wholesale fruit business, and then obviously you then started buying real estate. Were there any themes between those different experiences? Because they're quite different. Obviously. So what are the common themes, and how did that experience lead you to being so interested in cryptocurrency? Can you comment on that at all?
Yes, well, there's 2-3 bits to that. The first point is that I guess I'm a very bad economics person. I'll tell you a little story. When I was at the LSE, there was a chap there who was an absolutely brilliant cartoonist, and in fact, he never went to be an economist. He actually ended up being a cartoonist for the national newspapers. And whenever he does a cartoon that features an economist, he always calls the economist Melville. Over the years, I've had quite a lot of denigratory cartoons about Melville. But anyway, that's by the by. But the point is that while I was at university, what I was really interested in was mathematics and cryptography. Now, which has got nothing to do with the fruit business. It's got nothing to do with the property business, but it's got everything to do with cryptocurrency. So in a way, I suppose I was denying my roots, if you like, by being involved, as you get involved with different things for different reasons. But the one thing I think that is the same in all businesses is that you have to try things. You can't just say, well, this is the way it's always been done, this is how we should do it, and so on. You've got to have people who are disruptors. You've got to have, interesting enough, in the fruit business, there was a great disruption because there was a thing called licenses, and what licenses did was enable you to import certain fruit and so on. And when we joined the EU, they of course all went, because the EU could send as much as it wanted of everything. That was a huge disruption in terms of the fruit business. But it enabled lots of people to make lots of money because they recognized that it was going to be disruptive. The same thing with property, that people, I think in the early days when I was certainly involved, didn't understand that inflation was going to be an absolutely devastation in terms of value for cash, and was going to boost enormously the value of other assets. And actually, weirdly, we're almost in exactly the same position now, because we've got, perhaps you're coming onto this later, but I'll just mention it. I mean, we've had, through COVID, we've had these inconceivable sums of money created and so on by every single country on earth. That will, in the classical economics terms, will have an effect on inflation. There's no two ways about it. And the thing that I find very interesting, and I've thought quite a lot about this, is why didn't we have inflation, or lots of inflation, in 2008, 2009, when similar sums of money were, well, they weren't the same, but, similar sums of money were being created. And the answer is that it didn't go to people. It went to the banks to fill the holes they'd created. So it never got out. It never went anywhere. It just went in to fill the holes in the banks. And, if you look at the losses they made and so on, you can see where it all went. This time it's different. And I'm very interested, Rishi Sunak has done, I think, a very good job in trying to prevent disasters. People will argue with that, I'm sure. But the real point is that he has given individuals actual money. He's given people money for them to go out and spend themselves on whatever they choose. And I think that will, in time, bring about quite some severe inflation.
I'd like to take this moment to introduce to you our sponsor, Flexi, the must-have app to track and manage your subscriptions in one place. So most of us have multiple subscriptions nowadays for things like streaming services, gym memberships and food deliveries. These are great and take the hassle out of buying everyday products that we consume regularly, but it can be hard to keep track of them. That's where Flexi comes in handy, using super secure technology to connect your accounts to see all your subscriptions in a single dashboard, putting you in control of your spending. And what's more, Flexi's subscription marketplace allows you to discover new products you may love, all easy to pause, resume or cancel in a swipe or two. So give Flexi a try. It's free to download from the App Store, or check out their website at www.flexyapp.uk. That's FLEXY app.uk. Back to the podcast.
That's very interesting. I love the way you describe the money goes to plug the holes in the banks. I hadn't thought about that. That's really interesting. So, Harry, I know, Harry, you're relatively new to the whole crypto concept idea. From your perspective, do you have any other questions about crypto, just as far as what it might mean to you?
Yeah, definitely. I think, Temple, great story. And I love the journey from the fruit market and going through kind of where you are today. But I'd actually, from someone that has quite a limited knowledge of Bitcoin. So I guess, I think you mentioned it was 2008, 2009 that it was originally created. I guess from then when it was created to now, what's that transition been for Bitcoin, and how is it used today? Like in financial terms, what's its value? And I guess, how do you see it fitting in moving forward with like traditional banking and commerce?
Well, the interesting thing is that when Bitcoin was originally created, the whole idea was that it would be a payment system which cut out the banks, basically, so that the people didn't trust banks anymore and so on. So that was the idea. Now, what has happened, in fact, is that the view of that has changed. Because people trusted, in inverted commas, Bitcoin, they were prepared to hold it. They didn't want to spend it. It does get spent on things from time to time, and people ask to be paid in Bitcoin and so on. But in essence, in terms of trade and so on, it isn't used that much. Its turnover, I'm always permanently astonished at this, its daily turnover is of the order of $60 billion a day. That's just turnover. That's not people spending it. That is turnover on exchanges. And that represents something like 35 or 40% of the total sort of capital value of Bitcoin. Now, that has led to something else, which I think is very important. It means that because people are holding it, they called it HODL in Bitcoinese. Because people are prepared to do that, it has become another asset class. I should go back a little bit and say that the great thing about the internet is it enables the freely transferring knowledge or information. The blockchain freely makes it possible for you to transfer value. That's a very important distinction. So people have realized that having some Bitcoin is a store of value, firstly, and secondly, it's also it's become an asset class. Like stocks and shares, or people put wine aside and people buy art and all that sort of stuff. And I had a interesting thing was that the lady who was doing the interview was fascinated to know why or how it was, an asset class, because I don't think she really understood about asset classes. But anyway, and that came out that if you work it out, Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies are something like 1 or 1.5% of the total assets in the world, something like that. And if that's true, then if you have a diversified portfolio, it makes sense to hold 1.5% of your assets in cryptocurrencies, purely and simply because you are diversifying your portfolio. If you don't have any of them, it's obviously 1.5% is not going to make a lot of difference. But if you don't have any of them, you're not exposed. You haven't got a contra to all the other assets and so on. And that, I think, has become a really important point, that not only is Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies a store of value, rather than a trading asset, rather than a currency asset, it has become very much a slightly counter-cyclical value. And the thing to remember about that is that every new dollar created reduces the value of every dollar in existence. That's absolutely classic economics. That's what it is. If you then think about Bitcoin will only ever have 21 million Bitcoin. That's the way it's created like that. It will never have more than that. There's something like 18.5 million out there at the moment. So there's there's not that many to go. And because of the way it works, it'll take till 2140 to get them all out. So, you can work out it's going to be worth more. But the interesting thing is, if you've got one Bitcoin today, you've got one Bitcoin of 21 million or potentially 21 million, and you'll always have one Bitcoin of 21 million. If you've got $1 today, I have no idea what the real numbers are, but let's just say you've got $1 out of 10 trillion. Next week you might have $1 in 15 trillion, and obviously it's going to be worth less. And, I can't get past this in terms of what's going to happen in this world in the future.
So do you think there'll be a tipping point?
So that's my answer.
Okay, sorry to interrupt. Do you think there'll be a tipping point? Is 2040 going to be the tipping point when all of the Bitcoins are an issue? You mentioned that people are storing them as assets. I hold some for maybe for a rainy day, or figure out what I'm going to do with them. Do you foresee a tipping point where they start trading? And I guess another thing, another question to hang off that. So take Harry's cocktail connoisseurs business. So Harry, has these cocktail kits that can be delivered to the home because people can't go to the pubs and clubs, and he provides a little recipe kit. How would a business like Harry, so he's a retailer, start trading Bitcoin? Is it too early? How would you go about that Is there any relevance now to small businesses like Harry's?
Okay, well, I think there's a couple of points here. The first point is it's not 2040, the last Bitcoin we mined, it's 2140. It's a long way out.
2140. Okay. Wow. Yeah. Okay, that's thanks for clarifying
that. They have this thing called the halving, which happens roughly every 4 years. So
I see.
There was the halving in May, which was I think went from 12.5 Bitcoin per block to 6.25. So the next halving is going to be down to 3 point whatever it is, and that will continue. But there's a couple of different things about it, because in fact there is a transaction fee. If you want to move Bitcoin from Mr. A to Mr. B, there is a cost, and that cost is met by paying a little tiny bit of Bitcoin to what are called the miners. They're not miners, it's just computers, but they're called miners. And the problem is that, or one of the problems is that Bitcoin, other cryptocurrencies are slightly different, but we'll stick with Bitcoin because it's the one that most people know about. Bitcoin can only do about 7 transactions a second. Now, if you compare that to credit cards, they can do up to 75,000 transactions a second. That's obviously a fairly limiting factor. Now, what happens is that they have what's called a meme pool, and the meme pool is only just a sort of queue. It's a waiting queue for people to get in to actually be transacted. And so, you know, if it's chuntering along at 7 a second, that's fine. And all of a sudden it gets hit with 100,000 transactions for whatever reason. It's going to take them some days to clear it. Now, as with all things, the miners say, hey, hang on, we've got a lot of work here. We'll put the price up. And I mean, I've seen in the last 3-4 weeks, there's been a lot of activity in cryptocurrencies, and it's looking very strong at the moment, and so on and so on. And in fact, I've seen transaction fees of $150 for a transaction. Now, that's fine if you're doing $1 million transaction, but it's absolutely useless if you're buying a cup of coffee for $5. You know, it's just no use, and that is why you know, there are limiting factors to using, in particular, Bitcoin. There are other cryptocurrencies, which I think this is probably not the time to go into lots and lots of detail, but there are transactions that can be done for next to nothing. And there's various ways they can be done, and so on. But in essence, there is a what's the word? A prejudice or a good reason for not using Bitcoin as a trading currency. But having said that, there is no reason whatsoever not to not to accept Bitcoin for whatever. There are various businesses that do accept. I mean, there's something like 20,000 outlets worldwide that will accept Bitcoin for various things, and there's absolutely no reason why people shouldn't use or shouldn't accept Bitcoin for, you know, cocktails or whatever. It doesn't matter. All they have to be aware of is you can. There's the other great thing about Bitcoin and cryptos is that, you know, people say, "Oh, the check's in the post," and you know it's a lie. The point is, if you get sent a thing saying that your Bitcoin has been sent, it is true. You cannot take it back. You can't change it. You can't do anything. So if I send you, you know, half a Bitcoin, it will eventually get there. It might take, you know, some time because you send it slow or whatever, but it will get there. So there's no, you know, it's an absolute truth in terms of payment. So I would encourage Harry to think about taking crypto in one way, shape, form, or another. I represent Scotcoin, as James said. We are in the process of doing a migration at the moment, and once we've completed our migration, we're going to be in a position to transact for essentially, you know, 1 cent or 2 cents per transaction. Now that is a game changer in terms of people accepting coin, and it's not only us. I mean, everybody's going down the same route because it makes so much sense. So I would encourage you to engage with crypto and all the rest of it. Absolutely. So it's a good thing.
Okay, so this might be a good segue actually into the Scotcoin project. Obviously you're one of the owners of Scotcoin, and you're spending, you spend all your time, informing people, evangelizing the fact that this is a thing. And you talk about the Scottish, it's a Scotcoin with Scottish ethos. Can you just explain what that means to our listeners? And I understand that you're creating a new asset class for Scotland, and it's going to be part of the fabric of the economy. So can you talk about your the passion you have for Scotcoin, and a bit about the Scotcoin project?
Okay, well, the first thing to remember is that there are two bits. One is Scotcoin, the coin, and there is the Scotcoin project CIC, which is what we term the educational and informational arm of Scotcoin. So Scotcoin, sits out there as a cryptocurrency, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But we have taken the decision that we want to, we need to tell people what Scotcoin is. We need to tell people about cryptocurrency. And that is what the Scotcoin project's job is, if you like. And that's that. I mean, it's what we're doing now. We're telling people about what cryptocurrency is and all the rest of it. It's great. It's super. When I sort of, I'm not going to say first got involved, but probably about 5.5 years ago, I did an interview with somebody, and he asked me the question: "Is okay? So how many people know about crypto?" And at that point, I had no idea, but I did a little bit of research afterwards, and the answer was there was about 35 million people worldwide that knew about crypto or knew a bit about blockchain. Now, knowing about it a little bit and actually understanding it are two entirely different things. And the estimate at that time was there were less than 5,000 people who actually understood what the blockchain was. Now, that leads you on to say, well, that gives us an awful lot of room for improvement. And I'm very pleased to say that I think we've now got to the stage where there's probably maybe 250 million people worldwide who know about Bitcoin and blockchain, and there's probably 200,000 or 300,000 who actually understand about it. Now that's a huge improvement. I mean, that really is good, and that we're hoping that's going to improve. And the more people understand, and it's been obvious as the path has gone on, the more people understand about blockchain, the more things they can think that can be done with it. And there's incredible things that are happening by using the blockchain because of its unique, attributes. So that's the first point. Now, the second point is that going back to what I said about Veer has an effect within Switzerland. Our hope is that Scotcoin will have an effect within Scotland. I mean, people one of the things people always ask me is, is this a coin for independence and all the rest of it? And I always say, well, I really don't mind whether Scotland's independent or not. I mean, that's up for the people of Scotland. If they decide to be independent, that's up to them. But what is important is that everyone in Scotland should be better off. Why shouldn't they be? I think that's a good aspiration. And if we can use Scotcoin to achieve that, then that is really good news. And I would, stick my hand up and say that's what we're about. And I hope that was going to happen.
And as far as the Scottish ethos piece, can you drill about what is that for those listeners out there that don't know, understand that?
Well, there's a sort of two-edged sword, really. I'm sure you're all aware that the Bank of England was founded by a Scotsman, and that's perhaps what we mean. Now, the only trouble is, of course, we've subsequently had the Royal Bank of Scotland and Fred the Shred, who did a bit of messing around, and the result of that is that perhaps the Scottish ethos isn't quite as strong as it used to be. But I don't know. I think it is. I mean, Scots have always had a reputation for prudence. They've had a reputation for innovation. I mean, lots of inventions have been done by Scots, and they've always had a dare I say it, a sort of sharing about their wealth and about how they operate and so on. They're quite happy to share what they have and what they know with other people, and it's painfully obvious. I mean, all through what used to be called the Empire, all the people that were Scots that were all these places, they were helpful to everyone there, really. And I think that is the Scottish ethos, and our ethos is we want to help people, and our focus is quite a lot on charitable works and some stuff like that.
Okay, there's also that survival instinct. So I lived in Maine, New England for 9 years, and whenever I visit Scotland, it reminds me of that New England hard graft. I mean, there's in New England, being the northeast US, it's relatively frigid winters, snow on the ground for 4 months of the year. And it takes a certain type of person that has to kind of gather the in the olden days, I guess, gather the crops in the summer months, store them for the winter months, and it's a different breed of people. And I always think that Scotland, it reminds me about that New England hard graft. Having lived in the US for 13 years, I feel very at home in Scotland, but I think that's what it makes me think of too.
Yeah, I mean, traditionally, of course, what has happened is that the Scots have had to go overseas, in inverted commas, or to England or whatever, to earn a good living, and that I think is slowly changing, because it's fairly obvious that, in fact, the IT and crypto and blockchain and all the rest of it, fintech, is particularly suited to Scotland. I mean, we have FinTech Scotland as an entity. It's run by two extremely good chaps, Michael Paris and Stephen, and they've done wonderful things with limited resources, I may say. And I think people are recognizing, there is a recognition that Scotland is a good place to live. It's a good place to do business, and that is good. I mean, I like that. The other thing that's quite interesting about that is that where people are, and what's the right word I'm looking for, and of course it's probably gone now, where people are needing to be educated, Scotland has some extremely good and extremely old universities. And one of the things that FinTech Scotland did was they hosted a sort of round table 3 years ago, actually, now I think maybe 4 years ago, and they sort of, what they were trying to do is to come up with what were the good things that should come out of FinTech in Scotland. And one of them, sort of most important things they mentioned, was education. And I've always been very keen on education. I think it's absolutely what we need to do in all areas. There's not not just have to add A and B and all the rest of it. You've got to have a wide range of knowledge. And the FinTech forum, if you like, came up with this thing that it was important to get people educated in fintech and tech generally. And we at Scotcoin have been very involved with several of the universities in Scotland, producing short courses just to explain the background and so on. People, if they want to know a lot more, we can do that as well. But it's like mobile phones. I have no idea how a mobile phone works, but I can make a phone call. And the same thing applies to most people, in terms of blockchain and Bitcoin and so on. They don't need to know how it works. They just know it does work. It's fine. Saying about the universities, one of the things that I think is going to come, and in fact, I have been approached just quite recently by one of the education authorities in Scotland to put together a short course for secondary schools. Now, that, to my mind, is again a game changer, because if you've got, several thousand young people who they're all pretty tech savvy to start with, let's be honest. If they get the concept, if they want to continue to work in the business, or even if they just want to know how it works, that has got to be good news.
Interesting. Actually, Temple, I want to quickly touch something you mentioned earlier, actually, about, you said, I think about 20,000 outlets are currently kind of accepting this currency. But I guess for me, I'd be interested to know where you think it is going in the future. And also with Bitcoin, but also where you want to go with Scotcoin as well.
So I have a follow-up question too. So of the 20,000, how many outlets in the UK currently accept it? That's global, isn't it? 20,000 is global.
That's global. That's global. It's around about 1,000, 1,100 in the UK, roughly. It varies.
Is there a list available to the general public?
Yeah, you can go on to the internet and just say, is there a place that accepts Bitcoin near me or something like that?
Yeah, that's a really good. That's really. Yeah. I think that's really key for our listeners as well, because I think if we're aware of the types of businesses that accept it, then it's only going to perhaps help create more adoption.
Well, it makes more sense to be using it for higher value assets. It makes more sense to use that rather than cups of coffee, obviously.
Good point earlier, yeah.
I mean, people like Microsoft accept it. There's various big companies accept it. There's no problem at all. And the one of the things that that's interesting about that is that Dell famously accepted it, and then they sort of stopped, and then they started again. And the point was that Dell just sold it. They used to take the Bitcoin and sell it almost instantly, because, of course, it was because of the volatility and so on. But then they realized that, in fact, it made more sense to perhaps have a program whereby they kept back some of the value, and they started doing that. And I believe, I may be completely wrong, but I believe that Dell are now quite large holders of Bitcoin. So that's an interesting one. Sorry, just to go back to you. You were saying about the 20,000 units and so on, what have you. I think that the way it's going to go is it's Bitcoin is one thing, because it's a high value. It's sort of about, I think, $11,000 give or take at the moment. But there are other coins which are what they call stable coins. So one coin is $1 and it won't change very much. That's a good thing to use, perhaps, if you're thinking about taking crypto. But in essence, what's required is that the transaction fees are not significant in terms of the purchase. That's the critical bit to be any use for smaller value items. And as I was saying earlier on, there's quite a number of projects or initiatives going on at the moment to actually be able to achieve that. We're actually working on a system within Scotcoin whereby, and this is not rocket science, it's all out there, it's all on open source, whereby we would maybe have, and I'm making it up, 100 transactions done in a week and no fees. They would just be stacked up. At the end of the week, they all get put into a smart contract. Smart contract goes through the main Ethereum net, and you pay one transaction fee of $1 or whatever it is, and that covers the whole lot. Now, the point is, on that basis, you wouldn't need you wouldn't need to even consider the value of a transaction. You would accept it instantaneously. So from that angle, it would be a very good thing to do. And I do actually think that's the way it's going. It'll take some time, but it's good.
Interesting. And for someone like me that maybe wants to learn more about Bitcoin or get involved or even buy some Bitcoin, where do I go? What resources can you share with the audience?
Okay, here's a shameless plug. You can buy my book. My book is available online. It's on our exchange, the Scotcoin exchange, and we charge $9.99 for it. Anyone who's reading it, listening to this podcast, I'm very happy to send it to them for free. That's not a problem. If they can send me their email address, I'll do that with pleasure. It's not intended as a definitive tome. It's fairly light-hearted. It's a very what's the right word I'm looking for? It's a very easygoing read. It talks about lots of different things. For example, people have mentioned that Bitcoin is a Ponzi scheme, and I tell them why it's not. There's all sorts of different sides and aspects that are interesting. The most interesting thing I discovered when I was doing the research for it is that you may or may not be aware, but there is a direct correlation between the price of Bitcoin and the price of avocados. Now, I mean, you know, there are people out there who spend their entire life trying to figure out why something goes up and down. And apparently with Bitcoin, it's the price of avocados. So why it should be, I have no idea, but it is. People buy Bitcoin when the price of avocados goes up, and then, you know, sell it when it goes down, and so on. So that's the way it goes.
Right, interesting. So there's lots of resources out there. So you've got your book, and actually for the listeners that will be interested in potentially getting in contact,
Yes.
at the end of this podcast, we'll give you a chance to just share all those.
No problem. I mean, I'm very happy to do that. I mean, it's you know, as I was saying, the important part from our point of view is getting information out to people, and if we can do that using the book, that's great. You know,
brilliant.
Peter, did you have any question for Temple? You've been quite quiet there in the background. I'm sure you've got a question there.
Yeah. It was just kind of a quick question about what the future of Scotcoin is. So you've kind of been doing this since 2015. So the kind of 5 years in now. So what does the next 5 years look like in terms of?
I've got to give a little bit of background there. But one of the things that we very quickly realised was that, in fact, you know, banks and treasury departments and governments and so on were not going to allow people to transfer millions of dollars around the world without knowing where it came from, whether it was drug money, whether it was this, that, and the next thing. And therefore, there was going to be regulation coming to the crypto world. And I'm actually very pleased to say it is coming to the crypto world. The UK, the FCA now, if you're involved with crypto at all, you have to be FCA registered. And there's a whole lot of different stuff about that. But the point is that what that does is that gives people confidence in being going to buy a coin or buy something. I firmly believe, you know, we had a sort of, about 3 years ago, we had a sort of, again, another light bulb moment which said this was going to happen. And therefore, we had to be at the forefront of that. And we had to make sure that, in fact, the people that we dealt with were KYC checked and blah, 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 blah. And we do that. I mean, that's straightforward. So we are at the moment, Scotcoin at the moment is in the middle of a migration. And we're migrating from effectively using the Bitcoin blockchain to using the Ethereum blockchain. And the reason is twofold. At the moment, the cost of the Bitcoin blockchain is astronomical in terms of electricity. I mean, it's like Switzerland and Austria and probably Czechoslovakia all stuck together in terms of electricity cost. Ethereum is moving to a slightly different way of working, which is called proof of stake. Now, proof of stake will essentially mean that there is, to all intents and purposes, no cost to the planet in its operation. Now, that is, from our point of view, that's a good thing, and so we're very pleased to be involved in that. The other thing about that is that the Ethereum has these things called ERC20 tokens that it uses. Excuse me. Now they sit on the Ethereum blockchain, and they are the most widely used tokens in the world for anything. So we're moving towards more usage. That's the first point. I think from our point of view, we firmly believe that we will have various outlets, is the best way to describe it, that will accept Scotcoin for, you know, all sorts of things. And we have various initiatives to bring that forward. One of the reasons we didn't do a lot of work getting people on board previously was because we knew we were going to be moving away from the Bitcoin blockchain. No point setting everybody up and then have to set them all up again. So we're now ready. We're in the position of being able to do a lot of good work in that respect. So we're working on that at the moment. So I firmly believe, you know, as I was saying about VIA, it's not either or. It's not either fiat or crypto. It is in fact a blend. And the blend is together we're stronger. That's that sort of thing.
And actually, on that note, as far as the KYC, I can vouch for that. So my business Rocket made a transaction of Scotcoin, and there was a KYC process involved. And I'm also very interested in creating a loyalty program with my business Flexi, and we're just talking about how that might work. And it's looking at the advantage of a centralized loyalty scheme or a decentralized one. So we're just going through that process right now.
Great, lovely to hear it. Good. Well, I think we're coming up to 11 o'clock, and I think you said, James, you're kind of tight for 11 o'clock.
Yep.
Yeah.
Temple, just one final thing.
Yes.
Okay, quickly,
Sure.
I want 2 quick fire questions. So firstly, if you could meet someone for a coffee, who would it be and why?
It would be Clint Eastwood. I absolutely am a cowboy fanatic. I read amongst other books, but I read cowboy books. People laugh at me, and I watch cowboy films and so on. But the great thing about cowboy films is it's good and evil, and the good guys pretty much always win. That's okay with me. But they are there's the law of the West. There's certain things you must never touch a cowboy's hat. You must never be rude to a woman. There's all sorts of different things that are just lovely in terms of life. So that would be who. I know he's the quintessential cowboy. Really.
Great answer. And one final thing for our audience: if they want to learn a bit more about cryptocurrency, learn a bit more about you, and also get in contact with you regarding your book, how do they do that?
Well, they can email me at Temple. That's TEMPLE at scotcoinproject.com. If they give me their email and their name and so on, we'll send them the book. We'll send them all sorts of interesting information. And our website is scotcoinproject.com. Simple as that. Very simple.
Perfect. Well, I think we have run out of time today. But Temple, you've been awesome. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure. Absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Temple. Really enjoyed it. Really interesting conversation.